Okay. Let's get started. I'm expecting more people, but hopefully they'll trickle in. Tonight is part 4 of our series on the 8th chapter of Bava Kama, chapter HaChovel. And we're going to start by reviewing the last thing that we did at the end of part 3. We are, by the way, on page 84b if you were using a Gemara. And we're going to start with what we ended with last time for 2 reasons. One is it's been about a month since the last time we met. And what we're doing is a continuation of this piece. So I do think it helps to have the whole thing in front of us. And the other thing is that we kind of left off in the middle of something last time because we ran out of time. So it made more sense just to go back and see this piece from the beginning. Okay, so we were looking at the time, we were looking at some real life cases that the Gemara was bringing of people getting injured. In fact, I think the cases were all children getting injured and then actually getting evaluated to see how much value they had lost on the slave market, to see what the value was of the damage that had been done. Okay. So here we are. Hahu Torah de alas yade dianuka. So there was an ox that chewed the hand of a child. Presumably this is a permanent injury, although it doesn't say exactly what the results are, but it sounds bad. Atala kame de Rava. So the case came before Rava. Amar lahu zilu shaimuhu kavda, and Rava ordered them to take the child and appraise him as a slave, which means you find out what he would have been worth on the slave market yesterday with 2 intact hands, and you find out what he's worth on the slave market today, and you subtract the second number from the first number, and that's the value of the real damages done by the ox. But it doesn't quite work like that, because really they said back to him, V'hamarhu da'amar kol nishom ka'eved ein govinoto b'Bava. They said, but you're the one who taught us that any case where you have to appraise a person like a slave, we don't collect on those cases in Babylonia, in Bavel, which, by the way, for the entirety of this shir, we're going to use Bavel as a sort of descriptor for the exile. And as you will see, it ends up, I think, actually being a description of the entire Jewish world, including the world inside Israel, by the time you would get to the time period of the close of the Babylonian Talmud, because the phenomenon that they're concerned about is universal by then. But they describe it as we don't collect in Bavel, but from our perspective, that just means we don't collect anymore. Okay. Rava responds to them, Amar lahu lo tzricha de'i tafis. He says, no, it is actually necessary. We do need this number, because while we're not going to force him to pay, we're not going to force the owner of the animal to pay the trustee, whoever's holding the money for the child. We are, if the child or his family steals the money, we're going to refuse to retrieve it for the owner of the ox. Right? This money is kind of up for grabs, and whoever happens to be holding it at the moment gets to keep it. And in order for us to carry that out, we need to know how much money it is. Right? If the amount of money that you're entitled to steal from me and I can't retrieve it is $1 million, then that's one thing. And if it's $20, that's something else. But the court can't very well avoid retrieving it from you and giving it back to me unless it knows how much money it is that it's supposed to let you get away with. So we still need a number, according to Rava. Okay. Rava Latame. So the Gemara now goes off on a tangent. It's the tangent we're going to spend the rest of the evening on, more or less. Rava is being consistent here when he said that we don't collect cases that involve assessment as a slave in Bava. The Amar Rava, because Rava also said, Nizke shor b'shor v'nizke shor ba'adam govino to b'Bava. He said that damages done by an ox to another ox, or damages done by a person to an ox, are in fact collectible in Bavel. But nizke adam ba'adam v'nizke adam b'shor in govino to b'Bavel. But damages done by a person to a person, or done by an ox to a person, we do not collect those in Bava. And it happens that the cases that he's excluding here, which are the cases where the victim is human, are the same cases where the only way to find out what the value of the damages is would be to assess it on the slave market. So these two different statements by Rava amount to the same thing. So as I said, he's being consistent. Okay, but now we want to know why he has this particular category. So, my shna nizke adam ba'adam v'nizke adam b'shor delo. So, why are the damages of human on human or ox on human? Why are those different such that we don't collect on those in Bava? So, we're going to have to build a theory of what kinds of damages can be collected in Bavel, under which if I attack your animal, I have to pay you, but if your animal attacks me, you don't have to pay me. And they want to know what the difference is. And the first difference that they suggest is Elohim ba'inan v'leka. That maybe the problem is that we need the kind of judges that the Torah calls Elohim, and we don't have. Now we need to explain for a moment that what in Bavel, and in fact in everywhere outside of Israel, and in fact any time in the last 1500 years, we don't really have what the Gemara thinks of as rabbis. The title Rabbi, Resh Bet Yud, conferred the distinction that you were part of an unbroken tradition of teacher to student, going back to Moshe, and that title could only be conferred in the land of Israel. So it was not, they didn't give that title in Babylonia, and anybody who was trained as a rabbi in Babylonia was not really a rabbi, or in our terms in this case, not really a judge. And so there are some, anywhere where you have a technical need for an elder, a rabbi, a judge, right? Those are all sort of interchangeable. Somebody with the title Rav in the Gemara is not going to work. You need someone with the title Rabbi, and the title Rabbi stopped being conferred, I think about 1700 years ago. So that's, we don't have that by the time the close of the Babylonian Talmud, which is about 1500 years ago, this title doesn't exist anywhere on earth. Okay, so maybe the problem is that we need judges and we don't have them. Problem with that distinction is it's not going to work, because nizke shor b'shor v'shor ba'adam nami Elohim ba'inan v'leka. Because damages caused by an animal to another animal, or by a person to an animal, those also require judges, and we still don't have judges. Jerry, did you have a question? I thought I saw you talk, but you're muted. Okay.
I mouthed your answer as you were giving it.
Oh, okay. No problem. So that can't be, or at least it's not sufficient. It's sort of the base problem. It's the reason why we have a problem in which we can't collect all of our cases, but it's not the only thing going on here, because if that were the only thing going on, we would just shrug our shoulders, throw our hands up, and give up having a judicial system at all. There has to be something else going on, or we wouldn't have a judicial system. So Ella, Maishna shor b'shor v'shor ba'adam. So really, in fact, what is the difference that makes the animal injuries different than the human injuries? Because in those cases, we're acting as their agents, just like with admissions and loans. And acting as their agents seems to mean that we have a legal fiction or a legal fiction is fine, I'll take that, under which all judges who have operated at any time since we stopped conferring real judge titles are acting as the agents of the last real judges who existed. And in that case, the only thing they can do is fulfill their agency. And so now we have to figure out what is it that those last judges told them they're supposed to be doing. But it's clearly a legal fiction in the sense that if you go to a Beit Din today, the rabbis sitting on that Beit Din did not actually receive instructions from people who have been dead for 1700 years, right? There's a presumption operating here that the legal structure as it existed would want the system to continue in some way, and therefore they would have been perfectly happy to give instructions. But I don't think anyone assumes that there actually were instructions given, and if they were, they certainly weren't given to the people who are currently alive. Okay, but that doesn't really solve the problem. All it did is restate it. Right? We have a category of things where the judges are allowed to act as agents. We have another category of things where the judges are not allowed to act as agents. But not only do we not know why one is different than the other, we don't even know exactly what the parameters are of that category. And we're much more interested in knowing where the boundaries are than in knowing why, although they're going to be connected to each other. Okay, so the next bit says, Adam ba'adam v'adam b'shor, nami shlichutayu kavdinan, midid hava hodot v'havot. So in that case, let's just say that our judges can be the agents of the other judges when people are injured too, just like with loans and admissions. Loans, by the way, are where I say you owe me money, you say you don't, so I sue you. And an admission is where I say you owe me money and you admitted it in front of witnesses and you say, no, I didn't, and I sue you. It's almost exactly the same case. I think it might be one of those phrases like aid and abet, where it just sounds better to have two words, but whatever. In any case, the response here is that you haven't actually said anything, because if what you're saying is we have agency, then why can't we have agency by the human injuries as well? Amri ki ka'avdinan shlichutayhu b'midi dekimlan begave. So the response was, and we don't know who this they is that keeps speaking, but there's going to be a dialogue between they and somebody else for the rest of the Gemara, and it's not clear who these people are. In any case, so they said, well, we can only do agency with something that we have expertise in. We can't do agency where we don't have expertise. So that doesn't work though, because Amri shor b'shor v'shor ba'adam nami lo kimlan begave elapu chazi hecha mizdavni Torah b'shuka. So they said back, wait a minute, we the judges in the court don't have any expertise about the value of oxen either. So why are you letting us judge the cases in which an ox is injured? But because we don't have any expertise, we just go out and we go to the ox market and find out what oxen sell for. And so presumably Adam ba'adam v'adam b'shor nami po chazi hechad mizdavni avdi b'shuka. So if that's enough expertise for you, then let us do the same thing with the human injuries, and we can go to the slave market and find out what people sell for. So it's not, there's not an expertise difference between evaluating the values of ox bodies and evaluating the bodies of human bodies. The ode, tashlum kefel v'tashlum arba v'chamisha dekaitzi navid shlichutayu. And furthermore, the double payment and the quadruple payment and the quintuple payment, which are defined values, we should certainly be allowed to act as agents there if the problem is just about expertise. Double payment is when we catch a thief. They were supposed to have to pay back double what they took. stole $100, they have to pay back $200. But the way we're working it in Bavel is we only make you pay back the first 100. We can't charge you the second 100. That can't be about expertise because it doesn't take any expertise at all to tell you to pay the same amount of money twice. There does not seem to be a difference between slave markets in different places, at least not that's raised here. I have zero expertise in actual slave markets. My experience of slave markets comes entirely from Hollywood, and I hope it stays that way. But if that's a difference, it doesn't come out in the Gemara. In any case, so it can't be that having the expertise to know what the right number is the key here, because I could totally charge the thief twice with exactly the same expertise that I used to charge him once. But we don't collect double payments, or quadruple payments are if you stole a sheep and then ate it. Quintuple payments are if you stole a cow and then ate it. So we don't charge any of those extra payments, even though there should not be any expertise needed at all to just multiply the numbers. So we try again. Amri kikavdian shlichutaihu b'mamona. Maybe when we collect using agency, maybe we only collect principal and we can't collect in fine. Right, so you can only collect the original amount of the damages. Any number which is bigger or actually even smaller than that number, you can't collect, because that's not what we call mamona, which I've loosely translated principal. It's not exactly the right word, but it's the actual damages might be a better term. And that would explain the difference between collecting once but not being willing to collect the same number twice, because the actual damages was only one of those numbers. The second one is a fine or an extra charge. If we're not willing to collect extra charges, then that would explain why we don't do it. Sorry, we don't use agency to collect fines. Adam be'adam dimamonahu navi shlichutaihu. But in that case, if the problem is just about actual damages, you haven't told me anything that should stop me from collecting on a case in which a person injured another person. When a person injures another person, we have enough expertise to find out what the amount is. You just go to the slave market and ask the auctioneer there. I guess it's not your own expertise, but it's the same thing you're doing with the animals. And it's actual damages, so that shouldn't be a problem. So we have not solved that problem. So we try again. So maybe we only use agency to adjudicate cases that are common. Adam be'adam de lo shchicha lo avdin shlichutayu. And in that case, the reason we don't use agency on human cases is because they're just not common. So the Gemara says, well, in that case, hare boshet upagam de shchiach navi shlichutayu. So in that case, boshet, which is emotional damage or embarrassment or something like that, and pigam, which is damage resulting from rape or seduction. It's like a very specific form of damage. We should, in fact, do agency because apparently, right, here's the weirdness of this Gemara. It sounds like lawsuits resulting from seduction or rape are more common, considerably more common than lawsuits resulting from assault and battery. I find that astonishing. I find it bizarre in the extreme. I did not find a commentator who was interested in telling me anything about it. So I have no idea whether I'm making some sort of fundamental error here or whether in fact that's really what it's saying, is that you can't, if somebody punches somebody else in the nose and a lawsuit results, you can't adjudicate that because that's such a rare case. But if a guy rapes a woman, oh yeah, we have those every day. You totally adjudicate that because that's so common. Like, that's a really strange society we're operating in here, where the only form of assault that's common is rape. Really? Anyway, I don't know what to do with that, but that does seem to be what it's saying. In any case, the Gemara says, well, actually, yeah, we do adjudicate those cases. Funny you should mention it. We do adjudicate cases of boshet and pagam because they are common. And apparently they were also easy to figure out how much they were worth. Except maybe it turns out it's not true, because Deha Rav Papa Agvi Arba Mea Zuzi Leboshet, because Rav Papa used to collect payments of 400 zuz for boshet. It sounds actually like he has a standard fee. You humiliate somebody, I charge you 400 zuz. It's not clear that he's doing any evaluating. And so that sounds like and Rav Papa is certainly a relatively late Babylonian rabbi, so that would qualify for collection in Babylonia. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, Rav Papa. You can't use Rav Papa as an example because we ruled against Rav Papa. We think he's wrong. The Shalach le Rav Chisda le Rav Nachman. The Shalach le Chisda Knasa Magbit Bavel, because when Rav Chisda sent, there's a clause missing in the English translation that I wrote here. I'm sorry. Did I check that, Lona? Rav Chisda sent a note about what Rav Papa did to Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman responded. He didn't respond, oh, cool, now I'll do that too. Sounds like Rav Papa has a great idea. Instead, he responded, Chisda, come on, you think you can collect a fine in Babylonia? Right, like clearly Rav Nachman is horrified by Rav Papa's behavior here and by the fact that Rav Chisda thinks it might be plausible. So it seems like okay, Rav Papa used to collect these 400 zuz payments for emotional damages, but he shouldn't have, so we can't use that as evidence for anything. Ella kikav dinan shlichutaihu. It must be, in fact, that the case where we're allowed to use agency to adjudicate is b'milta d'shlicha v'it bechisaron kis. Must be that it needs to be common and involve a real loss, which in a case of boshet, there's no real loss, right? You suffered an emotional loss, so that, in theory, at least, you ought to be compensated for that, and the other person ought to be punished for it, and we resolve that situation by taking one person's money and giving it to the other. But you didn't actually lose any money. So that might be why Rav Chisda doesn't think that Rav Papa should have charged money for boshet. And this, we're coming closer to a category here. Okay, so we're only going to, as of right now, we're only going to collect in Babylonia on cases that are common and involve an actual loss of money on the part of the injured person. But if you have a situation that's common, but the person didn't lose any money, like somebody being humiliated, or you have something which is uncommon, but the person did lose money, there, presumably that would be, for example, assault and battery, then in those cases, lo avdina shlichutaya, we can't act as their agents. Therefore, hilka adam ba'adam afagav di'it bechisaron kis. Therefore, a person injuring a person, even though it does cause actual loss, kevan de lo shchicha lo avdinan shlichutaya, because it is a rare case, we are not going to act as their agents. Boshet afagav de shchicha, and boshet, even though it's quite common, kevan de leit bechisaron kis lo avdinan shlichutaya, since it does not have an actual loss, we're not going to be able to act as their agents. Okay, we think we have a result. But now we need to go back and challenge something that we had said before. Because we started out this whole thing by saying that if an animal was damaged by either a person or an animal, that we were going to adjudicate that case and then collect the damages. But now the Gemara is not so sure that that's correct. Bishor, Govin Bavel, is it really true that we collect damages when one ox damages another? V'hama Rava, but Rava, who is the same person that we started out quoting at the beginning, he said, Shor shehizik ein govinoto b'Bavel. He said an ox that damages we don't collect in Bavel. They didn't say what they damage. So the Gemara says that the azik man. So what or who did the ox damage? Ilema de azik adam. If we say that the ox damaged another person, my area shor de azik adam. Why would you teach about an ox damaging a person if that's the case you're interested in? Afilu adam da azik adam nami ein govinoto b'Bavel. We also don't collect when a person injures another person, and that seems like a more important, pertinent, common, whatever case. So if you were going to teach the rule that we don't collect damages when the injured party is human, the Gemara thinks it would make more sense to start with a case where a person injured another person instead of this case where an ox injured a person. But it's obvious to them that the default case of an ox injuring, where it doesn't say what he injured, is the ox injured another ox. Viktani ein govinoto b'Bavel. The problem, of course, is that Rava said this case, whatever it is, doesn't get collected in Bavel, which seems to contradict the statement we had of Rava at the beginning, which was that we do collect cases where the injured party is an ox. So the anonymous plural people are back. They said, Hatam bitam, hacha b'muad. There we were talking about a shor tam. Here we're talking about a shor muad. So we need to take a little journey for a moment into an earlier part of Masechet Bava Kama. There are some things we need to know about oxen and the injuries the damage that they cause in order for the rest of this Gemara to make sense. The first thing is that it is normal, apparently, for oxen to spend their day wandering around unsupervised. That's how they get water and food. Or at least with minimal supervision. If an ox starts attacking other oxen or it starts attacking people, though, then once the same ox has been sued twice for damages, the court issues a warning to the owner that the owner has to lock the ox up or kill it and eat it. And if they don't, they're going to become more liable for any damage the ox causes in the future. And here we are talking about what the Gemara calls Karen, which is damage that the ox causes through violence. Karen is a horn, so the oxen tend to attack with their horns. So oxen cause damage in a variety of different ways. Karen is one of them. So this is an ox deliberately doing violence to another animal or to a human because it's trying to attack it. And once the ox has attacked twice, it gets warned, then it becomes what's called a shor muad. A shor tam is an innocent ox. Shor muad is a warned ox. And a shor tam, the owner only pays half of the damages. If it does $100 worth of damage, the owner pays $50. As opposed to a shor muad, where the owner pays 100% of the damages. If it does $100 of damage, the owner of the shor owes $100. Eventually, presumably, the people of the town prevail on this person to get rid of this ox because it's causing more damage than it's worth. Okay. One other detail. So I said that's Karen. That's when it attacks with its horns. The other two kind of ox damage that we're going to deal with in this Gemara, there are others, but the two we're going to deal with here are Shane and Regel. Shane is a tooth, and Shane is when an ox damages things by eating it, which is sort of more innocent in the sense that the ox isn't trying to hurt anybody, but also less innocent in the sense that the owner should have anticipated the ox would be hungry, and the owner is fully responsible for the ox eating things, even when it's never been but a troublemaker before. And regel, which is a leg or a foot, that's when the ox walks on things. And again, it's more innocent in the sense that the ox isn't trying to cause trouble, less innocent in the sense that the owner should have anticipated that an animal that's trying to get from point A to point B is going to walk across the things in the middle, and it doesn't particularly care if the humans consider them to be breakable and important. And so the owner, because they should have been able to anticipate this, is fully liable from the beginning, again, for regel. Okay, back to the Gemara. So, they, whoever they are, had suggested that maybe the case where we do collect, the case where we don't collect the damage caused by a shore, by an ox, is a case of an innocent ox, a shore tam, but the case where we do collect is a case of a shore muad, a warned animal. Rava, but the problem with that is that Rava said something else that gets in the way, which is a muad b'Bavel. There is no such thing as a muad in Bavel. That is presumably because the only way to be a muad is to be sued twice. And if you're going to refuse to adjudicate the cases of an innocent ox, you're never going to convict an ox twice while it's innocent, such that you could get it to the point where you're going to have to warn the owner because it's been convicted twice already. So you're never going to get a shore muad if you're not willing to have a case of a shore tam. So they say, well, okay, if you say there's no muad in Bavel, maybe Amri de'iyad hatam v'aituha lahacha. Maybe it was already a shore muad in Israel at a time when they were still having real court cases there, and then its owner brought it to Bava. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, you told me we're not going to adjudicate uncommon cases, and now you've reduced this to a case where somebody had an ox that was sued twice and then transported it across an international border in order for it to attack somebody somewhere else. That can't be a very common case. So come on. That's uncommon, and it's not. You said we don't adjudicate uncommon cases here. Okay, so you try again. De'atu rabbanan dehatam v'yaduha acha. So maybe what happened is there happened to be some Israeli rabbis visiting at a time when this ox was going on its rampage, and they adjudicated the innocent ox cases. So it managed to get convicted twice and warned. And now we have a shore muad here in Bava. But the Gemara says, come on, sof melted de lo shlichahi. That's still pretty uncommon. You have to import your judges across an international border in order for them to judge cases of damage done by an ox. That's probably not something that's happening in a way that you would call common. So, and you said that we weren't allowed to adjudicate uncommon cases. So an ox that's been previously judged twice by foreign judges, I'm going to call that uncommon. Sorry, that does not pass the smell test. Okay, so one more line here, but there we go. Ella kika amarava b'shein v'rega demuadin mitchilatan ninu. Really, in fact, it must be that the case that Rava said that we do collect on, those must be cases of shein and regel, cases where the animal ate something or stepped on something, because it doesn't have to have been previously sued in order to owe full damages. And keep in mind that the reason why it matters that it has to pay full damages is that we're only going to collect on cases in Babylonia where the amount that you're charging is exactly the same as the actual damages. Right? That was also one of our standards. That's probably why, in fact, we're not willing to adjudicate a case of a shore tam, because the shore tam only pays half of damages. Half is not the same thing as whole. So therefore, we're not going to be willing to do that case. But here we have a case that an ox can cause damage where it's common and it's only ever going to pay exactly the actual damages. So what we are left with is the only case that an ox is going to pay for that the owner, I'm sorry, oxen very rarely pay their own bills. The only case where the owner of the ox is going to have to actually pay money in Babylonia is going to be a case where the ox damaged another animal, or probably an inanimate object, not a person, by eating it or stepping. We've narrowed things down here pretty considerably. And notice that we have completely removed any possibility of taking action against the owner of an animal that is deliberately trying to kill people. That is almost certainly not to be taken at face value. Then we actually, just like we saw Rava at the beginning of the Gemara, willing to calculate an amount of money that he was willing to let someone steal from somebody else. It sounds, in fact, like he's kind of hoping they'll steal it. It is also the case that they would find extrajudicial ways to make it abundantly clear to a person that their dangerous attacking ox could not be continued to be allowed to wander around the city streets all day. That I don't think there's any question that they would have taken an action, but it wouldn't have been the official formal action of the Gemara's law. Now, here we bump up against something we've bumped up against before, especially many times last year in Sanhedrin, which is that if you make the laws of due process strict enough, then you end up needing to have a whole separate extrajudicial method of dealing with real life situations, and you end up with no due process at all, which is possibly something to keep in mind. Because we have, for the better part of the last 2,000 years, had a legal system which has, shall we say, fewer checks and balances than it would have had otherwise, because we couldn't use the official system because the official system wasn't available to us. So we had to kind of make stuff up around the edges, which is not as controlled or necessarily as fair. So what you end up with is a system where people spend almost all of their time learning Torah, studying about things that don't ever happen in a real Jewish community, and the things that actually happen in real Jewish communities are not bound by the same rules as you would expect if you read the overwhelming majority of the writing on the subject of halacha. Okay. Are there questions? Yeah, you can just unmute and talk. There's only a few of us here.
I'm imagining an ox, two oxes damaging very different sorts of people in their arms. One of them is an axeman, and one of them is an artist.
Mm-hmm.
So the value lost by the artist is much greater than the value lost by the axeman. Does the Gemara at all distinguish between those?
Yeah, so that's why we are evaluating the real damage on the slave market. And slave market is not going to be perfect because it may be that, for example, creativity is not as valuable in a slave as it might be in a free person. But it's going to be some sort of approximation that, you know, you would have been willing to pay whatever for. Usually I use a Major League Baseball player instead of an artist as the person whose arm is extremely valuable, but whatever. And you would have been willing to pay a lot less for a guy who swings an axe because there are just so many more of the second group of people that the price is lower. And so that should get you an approximation of that difference. And the truth is that it's not, other than the evil of slavery, which is definitely evil, and I don't mean to poo-poo that, but it, as just a practical matter of determining value, it's not a terrible way of determining value. It's just that slave markets are so evil that I'm not sorry we don't have them, even though they were useful for this purpose. But that is what the slave market is supposed to be getting to. If we didn't care about the difference between individuals, we would just say, well, okay, an arm is worth $100,000, and we would just move on. But we're trying to actually to get to that kind of difference.
Okay, so we're saying the slave market pays attention to what the person uses the arm for.
Yeah, or what they could use the arm for.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, so we will be back at 8 o'clock next Monday night. Jerry, I noticed that you asked me for the location of the recordings. I can send you a link to the Shoals YouTube channel, which I'm supposed to be going in there once a week or so and labeling things and putting them in the right categories. And I'm way behind on that, but I think that you can still find them by date, and my class meets on Monday nights. It's the only one that does, so hopefully that will still make it possible to find them.
I'll look around.
There are only 3 more before this.
Okay, I will look around.
I'll send you the link. Okay, thank you very much. I will
Thank you
see
very much.
Good night.
Good night.